coming through, particularly with in light of the political parties now taking sides in the political asylum issue.
Yes, Alicia, the tweets are very short comments, yeah, and it's really difficult to to engage with them thoroughly, not knowing the full context. Yes, but already what you can see really is how the situation in Zimbabwe is actually inciting quite a divergency of standpoints here in South Africa. Yeah. And I guess it's also happening abroad.
And what is our role as South Africans, as the neighbors? We know that we house a lot of Zimbabweans. I mean, they grow up, they live with us. It's literally like an extension of a province to go to Zimbabwe. How should we be viewing this situation? Should we be taking a third-person stance saying, well, we're not going to get involved, or do get involved and suffer the backlash, whatever it may be?
I would actually advise that as South Africans, really, we must stand our ground and provide constructive advice.
Absolutely.
To the people of Zimbabwe. But the people of Zimbabwe should actually solve the Zimbabwean problem. It's very important that whatever solution is going to come out of the present crisis in Zimbabwe, it must be an authentic solution. Authentic in the sense that the people of Zimbabwe can live with it. They can collectively embrace it, and they can defend it.
But Professor, aren't elections and voting somebody into power an authentic way to do things? As we've seen, Mugabe was re-voted by the Zimbabwean people, hence we are here now.
Yes, he was, but remember the history of elections in Zimbabwe, especially if you can go as far back as just look at what has been happening in Zimbabwe from 1999.
Yeah, intimidation.
Yes, you'll find that. Yes, you'll find that the culture of internal party democracy within ZANU-PF first started to get eroded.
Let's talk about that.
Hence you'll find that even the results of elections, many people would still question: have they not been rigged? Have they not been doctored here and there? Are the people in rural areas provided enough information they need to choose knowingly which party to vote for? Or are they manipulated? So these are the questions that are always there when you look at elections in Zimbabwe. The leveling of the playing fields, the transparency.
And the democratic and constitutional space, Professor, doesn't it allow for such things to be to be recognized pretty fast? If you say if somebody has rigged an election, for example, we've just seen the momentous ruling in Kenya. Couldn't they have done that in Zimbabwe way back when they were supposed to?
Yes, but the problem in Zimbabwe, even the institutions themselves,
pretty weak.
Even the institutions, I'm talking about the judiciary itself, it's in such a constrained, severely challenged position.
And the army?
The army?
Finally, after how many years? Why has the army not done any of this way back when? That's the question that a lot of people are asking now.
Yes, for a long time the army was actually regarded as a friend of Robert Mugabe.
True.
Yes. And also even the commissioner of the police, Chihuri, you see, was the commissioner of the police. All of them were actually seen, the security cluster was actually seen as the vanguard of the ZANU project under Mugabe. But I think with the army, they came to realize that, look, things are just getting worse and worse in Zimbabwe. And there's a real possibility that Grace Mugabe could actually be a future president of Zimbabwe. I think it was out of considerations of self-preservation by the army itself that it decided to stand up. Yeah, because if Grace were to become the president of Zimbabwe, you see, many, especially the elite, the leadership of the army, would probably be changed completely. So it was very important for the army to also look into its own situation. And I changed leadership.
Prof, I asked Professor Moore about this. I mean, at such a critical time, we understand that the opposition is totally weakened in Zimbabwe. But isn't this the best time to get their ducks in order, or in a row, so to speak? And what could they do?
Yeah, ideally it's the best time for the opposition.
Seize the opportunity.
To unite, get their ducks in a row. But at the same time, we must not undermine the historical dominance of ZANU-PF, not only in politics, but in Zimbabwean society. Because this is the party which is associated with the second Chimurenga, and of course the third Chimurenga. The third Chimurenga, they refer to it as the struggle for economic freedom. Hence the land grabs which happened. Hence the indigenization policies. The third Chimurenga, the liberation of the economy.
Yeah, but Prof, I mean, isn't that the same thing? We're suffering the same thing in the country as well. But isn't it time that people move away from that perception that, fine, this is our liberation movement, but it does no longer serve the purposes of today or of our needs of today?
Yes, that can happen. It's important that that happens.
And where does it start? How do you get people to move towards that type of thinking?
But where it starts, my argument is that it needs to start with the ZANU-PF.
Absolutely.
So that within the ZANU-PF, democracy is taken seriously. Yes. Because once the ZANU-PF is transformed, I'm actually hoping that with all that is happening in Zimbabwe, the end result will not only be the removal of Mugabe, but it will be the democratization of ZANU-PF itself. Because once democracy gets entrenched within the ZANU-PF, they will respect the opposition. They will respect the fact that at a certain point, they are going to lose at the ballot box. Yes. But until that culture of democracy within the ZANU-PF starts growing and finds leadership expression, otherwise Zimbabwe is still going to run into another crisis.
Yeah, you know, Professor, we just saw with the Lesotho elections where the opposition was saying, for us to even participate here, look at the reforms of the constitution. Shouldn't it be something that is considered strongly also in Zimbabwe when we look at the current democratic system that they have?
Zimbabwe, I think they actually have a good constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people are not.
I hope we can find time to go through it. And I think Mugabe is actually using that constitution to shelter his refusal to leave power. You see. Because if you look at chapter 1 of the Zimbabwean constitution, it actually underlines the supremacy of the constitution, the supremacy of the rule of law. You see, that is why you find that even the army, General Chiwenga, they are actually treading it carefully. They are treading it carefully because the outcome of their initiative should be something which SADC, the African Union, international powers are going to recognize and accept. Besides that, General Chiwenga is very concerned about them setting a precedent in Zimbabwe which will haunt the country for generations to come. That's why I fully understand why they are threading it carefully, not really applying force and pushing Mugabe out of power.
But why though, Professor? Because as we understand, I mean, if they've got such a good democratic system, but their judicial bodies and enforcers of the rule of law and the democracy are very weakened. So it works against each other.
Unfortunately, those democratic values are on paper, especially with Mugabe, who is, should I say, an elected, a voted dictator, you see, in Zimbabwe. Because he was voted, yes. Well, we may question the credibility of the elections and how we actually won, but he was voted. But he's not the embodiment or a symbol of democracy as a person. As a person, Mugabe is a symbol of dictatorship. A very crude one, actually.
Let's talk about the future for Zimbabwe. Let's look at where do people need to start the transitional leadership?
Absolutely.
What is their first task at hand? Where should their main focus be, Professor?
Absolutely. Alicia, I think the starting point for Zimbabwe now is to finish what the army has started. Yes. Finish it, but don't rush it. If I were to advise the Zimbabweans, I would say, please don't rush it. This man has been in power for 37 years. And to remove him is not going to be dramatic, especially with the constitutional dispensation which Zimbabweans committed themselves to. This could take another 2 weeks. This could take up to the time of the ZANU-PF Congress, but the Zimbabweans need to be steadfast and they need to be prepared to stick it out a bit longer. They must not be dramatic, set deadlines 12 o'clock the following day. No, they need to be steadfast and determined. Mugabe is already the past. He is the past which is refusing to go. He is the past, you see. But mapping the way forward, Zimbabweans will need to have a truly fair and democratic election. No intimidation, no vote rigging, no interference. Let the people speak at the ballot box. That is the starting point. And the second point for me, which I think is very crucial, an economic recovery plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
An economic recovery plan.
Decade-old sanctions.
Yes.
Jeez.
But not a broad-based recovery plan like you normally find in South Africa. South Africans like to come with very elaborate policies and end up implementing zero.
Zero, that's true.
That's South Africa, you see. I hope Zimbabweans will learn from us. Yeah. They must come with a focused economic recovery plan, you see. A mini Marshall Plan to help Zimbabwe, you see. In other words, focusing first on how to utilize regional financial institutions in Southern Africa. I'm talking about the Southern African Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and also short to medium term recovery loans, just to kickstart the economy of Zimbabwe.
Absolutely.
But most importantly,
get investors interested.
Most importantly, have a leadership which is not tolerant of corruption.
This is what I want to talk about very quickly before I let you go, Professor. I mean, with that in mind, I mean, how do you then start with all this new transitional moves with the old people still at the helm? Because a lot of people, as they've been called now, those people that have been rallying behind Mugabe, they've been called, what, the G40. Those people are still the next in line to take over power from him, should he, of course, be forced to exit. But what if they stay in power and people still see the same trend going on over and over again? How do we guarantee that the new leader is going to have the best interests of the people? Because from what we've seen, the politicians within the ZANU-PF have sat and said nothing and let Mugabe run the country as he pleases.
Alicia, that's a very important issue, because I argue that as part of what in academia we call it the decoloniality project. Yeah. You see, what the Zimbabwean politicians need to learn and unlearn is how to relate to power. Absolutely, yeah. In fact, the whole African continent, leadership in the entire continent, that's true, need to relearn how to relate to power. Once you have power, how should you behave? And once you have power, how do you ensure inclusivity, not elitism? You see. So in other words, a serious culture shift is required within the ZANU-PF, but most importantly, the generational mix at leadership level. Emmerson Mnangagwa could come in, but do his 5 years and go. He's already 75. Yeah. Do his 5 years and go. And I hope ZANU-PF could be firm on that. He should do his 5 years and go.
But isn't this where we say the AU should be more of an authoritarian body, where they say, after so many terms, African president, you are going to be out of office, just to make sure that we don't get these disputes? This is always what we're talking about, Professor. We're always analyzing leaders that cling on to power when they know they should have left the office long ago.
Alicia, it's a big problem of the African continent.
It's a huge, and until somebody sets a term and says, you will adhere to this regardless of whatever it is that you have in your country, these are the rules that you will adhere by that are forewritten by the AU.
your issue is taking us to a very fundamental problem facing the African continent, the issue of territorial sovereignty.
That's the thing.
The borders which were created by our colonizers. Whilst we talk ill of our colonizers, we don't want to question the borders and the boundaries they created. And as a result, it's difficult for the AU to intervene in the affairs of a sovereign state.
Wow, I knew that was the word I was looking for, the sovereignty, because every country goes back to that and says, well, the AU cannot dictate to us because we're sovereign. Professor, thank you so much for that sound analysis. Thanks. That is Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo live with us here in studio. And of course, we are still deliberating the developments out in Zimbabwe.